So here we are once again, myself, Morgan, we got Nathan, and today we got Elle in the house. This is the first time having her on Enlighten Up. What's going on, Elle?
Hello, hello. Thank y'all for inviting me on. I'm excited to be here.
Nice, nice. And if you can just tell everyone who you are and what you do.
Yes, my name is Elle de Lyon or De Lion, which way you want to call it. And I make pretty dope art. And I do that through many different platforms, podcasts, a talk show, and I also organize community arts events and showcases for emerging artists everywhere, everywhere. Reaching Intelligent Souls Everywhere is the organization that I work
Nice.
for. And yeah, I'm really excited. I've been doing that for a really long time, community development work, and it really fulfills me. And I also am an artist who performs as well and have multiple disciplines that I get into. But I think I really found myself in art or found my way to art through mindfulness. I realized through practicing yoga and learning how to teach it to other people that was an art, and it really helped bring me closer to things that I thought that I wasn't good at, like drawing and writing and singing and stuff like that. So yeah, all of those things kind of inform me and my perspective. So hopefully that's enough to get the conversation going. Let me know if you want to know anything else. I'm sure we'll find out.
And today we're talking about ego death. And I just realized how, and you've heard the term Elle, ego death,
Mhm, mhm.
right? And how controversial that term is. Um, Everybody has a different opinion on what ego death is. And of course, there's some people who say there's no such thing as an ego death. And and there's even some that say there's no such thing as ego. But ego death is one of those terms that is that you hear it a lot, but I think, in my opinion, when most people use the term ego death, we're not talking about the same thing.
Hmm.
In my
What's
mind, I feel like most people have the term wrong. And the spiritual teacher that I was talking to seems to have the same opinion on that too. I feel like most people use the term wrong. But either one of you or both of you, what's your take on ego death, if you've heard the term before? Nathan's new to all this, so
Not new. I just never experienced it before. Shut up. Shut up.
ego
Yes.
death?
yeah, Nathan's probably like,
Okay,
huh?
so
What? Trying to
from what
figure out how he
I've
can relate.
heard about ego death is that, there are these different parts of ourselves that exist. And one of them is the ego. Where I learned about ego was from Freud. Um, I believe that's correct. Cut
Okay.
that out. It's not.
Either Freud or Jung.
Or Jung. Yes, Carl Jung or Freud. And what I've heard about it is that there's these three selves. One of them is the ego, the super ego, and the id.
Mhm.
And the id is like your most kind of authentic self. People have reckoned it to be, because that's the self that you are when you don't have an awareness about the world. Like, you haven't had experiences yet. It's when you're first born and through infancy until you reach I guess like what's like adolescence and
Mhm.
adulthood. And then you get, as you grow through those experiences, you start to be gain an awareness about yourself in relation to other people. And because of your awareness about yourself in relation to others, there are certain things that you start to not do and do because of how it will impact others, and then how that impacts you when you do, behave a certain way towards them. So for instance, like, you won't take off your clothes in front of everybody anymore. Like, maybe as a child you might have done that. You didn't have an awareness that it offended anyone, or that it was you showing out your private parts. You didn't think about those things. But as you started to know the rules about society and the morals and all these kind of things, your religion or your culture starts to impact the way that your perspective on the world, then you
And
start
also
to.
as you change, your body starts to change as a
Right.
individual. Yeah.
That too. Like,
You
you
are not
start
offended
to.
by babies being naked, but they would start to feel a certain way as you're growing and your body's
Yeah.
changing. Yeah.
Exactly. Like puberty, biological changes also dictate, what you will and will not do. And then because it puts you at risk for certain things if you are in certain places, like it's about your safety and survival and your thrival and all of that. And so that's when your ego starts to develop, is what I've come to know, that, and your ego starts to kind of develop a voice in your mind, if you will, like that devil angel on your shoulder, some people likened it to, and it tells you what to do and what not to do, and it kind of dictates or becomes your compass of how you will operate in the world. And there's certain things that now can feed your ego and also deplete your ego, maybe help you to, because your ego is filled with things that, again, are not necessarily you. It's like a bunch of different ideas and thoughts that have come to be you, if you will. So there is still that id that exists that you could go back to, but I think it would be difficult to decipher who's really talking. And then the super ego, from what I've understood, is like that self that starts to understand that all those other selves exist, and so therefore you must take that into account before you act. Like it can't just be you acting off of what you've come to know based on your environment. It's also you looking at those things and then looking at that from a, like, I guess a macro lens, so that you're really being more mindful. And the ego, because it's filled with all these different things, you have to be careful of when you let it be your ruler or be the thing that you follow in your actions, because like maybe you grew up a lot of people telling you how cute you were, like as a child, and now that has filled your mind of being like, almost, I've heard this thing called like pretty people syndrome, like where you've gotten a lot of compliments, so much to a fault actually, because it didn't help you to grow past challenges, because people would pretty much lay out a red carpet for you, like if you made a mistake, because of how cute you were, and or maybe how sensitive you were and your response. People just helped you, and then a learned helplessness develops, and that also can feed into your ego, and I think it could make you turn into like a narcissistic person. I think that's probably one of the root causes of narcissism, for instance. And that's like usually when I hear about like talk about ego death and allowing your ego to die, it's because you need to allow those ideas that you've developed about yourself that might not even be you to die, so that you can really be who you're supposed to be, or who you could be. Like maybe not supposed to, I don't know if jury's still out on destiny and all that stuff, but yeah, that's where I've landed on it so far. So I'd love to hear what other people think, because I don't know, I haven't talked about it in a while, so thanks for bringing it back up.
Interesting. So based on what I just heard from you, there may be more than one definition to ego death. But when it's used in spiritual circles, based on what you kind of said, it's not based on what you said.
Okay.
But it can be based on what some people say within new age circles. It'd be interesting. So what's an example of that? You mentioned what did you say about ego death again? You said
like allowing the selves to die, like so you could be, I think it's like kind of returning back to the id, sort of.
or returning back to the id. Okay, well, let me take it this way, because Freud, of course, they had their divisions of dividing this thing into three parts, as you said, the id, the ego, and the superego. I think from his standpoint, the superego meant your environment. So the people who influence you within your environment, your parents, caregivers, religious leaders, friends, society itself, all those people have an effect on how you do things. So like say, for example, there's something that you really want to do. Your id, being the impulsive part of yourself, wants to do this thing really badly, but you don't do it because the superego, which is just say your religious social circle, have rules against a certain thing that you want to do. So you don't do it, at least not in the company of the people within that circle. but you may find an environment where you can do it, or you do it secretly, pretty much. So that's your ego that's doing that. So your ego is governing the id, because the id, as you mentioned, you would just do anything. If you didn't have an ego, you would just do anything. You would take a crap on the ground. You would just run around naked. You always use your outside voice. Hey guys, how you doing? And you're like, whoa, whoa. Use your inside voice, like that type of stuff, right?
I know some ids.
Say it again.
I know some id-centered adults.
Yeah, they can't it's so impulsive and they can't shut that off, right? The ego, not that they don't have an ego, they have an ego, of course, but the ego is allowing the id to express that without consideration for anything that's around them, right? And that changes depending on culture, because let's say if we're talking about your loud voice versus your inner voice, that's different within cultures. Some cultures, being loud is a sense of being open and social and authority, where in another group it could be considered as inappropriate, right? So you go into another culture now and you have to know the rules of that culture so that you can adapt and be able to work within that culture. And so that's where the super ego comes in. And of course you have your ego, as I said, and you have your id, which is the impulsive part of yourself. From my standpoint, I call all three of them the ego. So I use that depending on the context that I'm speaking in. So I do use the same id, ego, super ego. But when I'm talking about the self, I use all three. I'm talking about all three. The actual sense of self that we feel in our bodies right now, that gives me the sense of I. That gives me the sense of I. So
So
when
is
you
the
use
ego I?
death, say it again.
In that explanation, the ego is I,
The I.
or there's no separation.
Well, there's your ego just means self.
Got you.
Right. So the definition of ego is self. If you look in spiritual circles, they say the definition of ego is false self. That's only because for those who have experience with spiritual enlightenment or having a spiritual awakening, you come to the realization that the ego that you've been carrying the whole time is not a real self. But that's debatable if it's a real self or not. But the idea is it's a false self, and you come to know your true self. So that becomes the false self. So some definitions, ego is the self, and in other definitions, the ego is the false self, meaning the same thing. It's just one is saying that small I, the sense of self, is not a real one. It's a delusion type of thing. All right.
How do you know if you're living in your true self?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Well, then now you're talking about something differently. Now you're just talking about your ego being the most authentic self.
Oh, okay.
Right. Depending on who you're talking to. But when someone's talking about living your best self, or your true self, they're just talking about that you have a well-developed ego that knows, that is not hiding behind disguises. It's being its true self by being authentic to itself, and it's not worrying about everything people thinks about them. They're going to live their true self because they're trying to express their true selves without the worry of being judged. So that's something different than small self versus true self. Usually that's what people mean when they say authentic self. So that's why it gets confusing, because we don't have other words for this stuff. It's not like someone said, okay, we're going to come up with more words in the English language to represent ego. All we have is ego, egoic, ego defense mechanism, ego this, ego that, egotistical. We have those words everything I just said are things that represents the ego. Again, when I'm saying it, the self, the id, ego, super ego. Right. But if you break it down from the other standpoint, like what Freud is using, it gets a little confusing because it sounds like the id is not part of the ego. But in this case, he's just talking about the ego is governing the impulsive part of the self, and the ego is being governed by the superego, which is the environment, or the people within your environment that allows you to operate within your reality in a certain way based on culture, religion, gender, and the list goes on. If you're a poet, there's certain things you probably will stay away from in public because you want people to see you as a poet, as opposed to being something else, even though you could be those two things, right? But there's things that you may do because it's like, oh, people are here to see me as a poet, so I should be saying things poetically or talking with a certain level of elegance or whatever to give the persona that I'm a poet. Now, what happens if you really, really believe that's the case, that you don't even realize that you're acting, that you really believe that you are all those things that you say you are, and there's nothing wrong with that, but then you became so attached to it that it starts to cause problems in your life because now everything that you do outside of being a poet is it's a contradiction. And that can cause someone a certain amount of dis-ease when they start thinking, oh my gosh, I can't do anything outside of this thing because everybody knows me as a poet and I see myself only as a poet. What happens when you want to cook something? Well, I can't cook that. I'm a poet. What do you mean? That has nothing to do with poetry. You got to cook to survive. That would be a problem if you really were so attached to being a poet and you couldn't do anything else. So the self is very fluid and has the ability to know that I'm these things within context.
It'd be kind of funny just writing about how he's starving. I'm so hungry right now.
I'm so hungry right now. I can eat a horse. And you find a word that rhymes with horse or something, and that's all you could do. It would suck, and you would suffer by that. So this is why in our lives, ego causes a lot of problems from that standpoint, because we really believe the ideas that's been given to us.
Yeah.
You may have heard this as a child or growing up. Just say if you want to play a certain sport, and you say, oh man, I want to try that sport. And someone says, you can't play that sport. That's not a black sport.
Yeah.
Things like that. It's very limited. What do you mean I can't play golf because I'm black? It took Tiger Woods to come and play the sport to say, okay, we can ease off a little bit. But back before Tiger Woods, playing golf, if you said that to anyone being a black person, they just look at you and laugh. What are you talking about? You can't do that sport. That's not a black sport.
Well, some sports are just too pricey for people, like hockey. You ever try to play hockey as a kid? I remember I tried out once.
You know how many black people play hockey though? Even before
I know,
we were
but like
born?
it's so expensive. Like I remember I tried out
Expensive.
once, and the coach is like, "All right, we need $1,000 for equipment." I'm like, "All right, I'm out." And sometimes you just get priced out of sports. It's just not fair,
But yeah, but that's a different issue, right? Nothing to do with it not being a black sport. It's about can you afford it or not, based on your economical situation, right? And probably most people within a certain group, depending on the time and the era, couldn't afford to play hockey. They could afford to play basketball because it was cheaper, right? But nothing to do with race or color or anything like that. It's economical.
Yeah, I get you.
Right. So even that can be that could be a limitation too. But imagine just being limited because of the color of your skin. There's certain things you can't do, or you can't be a physicist because people don't do that. Like, what I mean, or you can't be this, but here's the 5 things you can be. Right. And you see how it plays out that within certain groups, we're probably more prominent in a certain area of a field of interest or whatever over other things. Right. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But imagine that you believed yourself to be something so much that you refuse all the other stuff because you believed that these certain things were out of your reach. Right. So that's where ego can be a problem. Right. But you need an ego. You can't do anything without an ego. You can't do anything without a sense of self. You need a sense of self. But I would say, back to what Elle was saying earlier, I would say the ego is probably developed. I would say the ego is fully developed by the age of 7. A child starts to notice their ego probably around 2 years old, maybe 18 months, 2 years old, something like that. Probably around that time period, right? So when it comes to ego death, at least when you hear it in non-dual circles, when you hear ego death, they're talking about the whole sense of self temporarily dying. When other people use it, they're usually talking about the ego defense systems falling apart. Right? The lowering of the shield of the defense mechanisms of the ego. So like right now, I could say something right now and Nathan takes offense to it. Right? Or I say something to Nathan directly. Let's say if I give him a piece of advice about comedy or something like that. But in his mind, he feels he's so good now that he doesn't need my advice anymore. Right? That's his ego being defensive. It may be in good cause. It may be a good reason for that. Maybe he is so good. Why in the hell is he still sitting here taking advice from me? Right? That could be the case. But regardless, that's an ego defense. So in those other circles, when they're talking about ego death, they're more talking about the ego defenses temporarily falling apart. Right? To me, that's not an ego death. That's an ego. I don't even have a term for that, but that's more of lowering of the shields.
Mhm.
But if two people are having a conversation and they understand the context, I guess you could use the term ego death, right? Because two people know what you're talking about. It's like, yeah, I had an ego death. But when I hear ego death, I'm assuming that the person is saying that they had an experience, a spiritual peak experience, and then during that experience, they lost the awareness of their ego, of their sense of self.
Does that mean they're returning back to the id to you?
No,
Like
because in the
what
term that I'm
like
using it,
what's the
the it
Mhm.
falls apart too.
And then what does that state look like? Like, is there a definition for that?
Void, Sunata, non-dual suchness, God, Brahman, Jehovah.
Mhm.
When your ego dies, totally dies, that's what happens.
And what will you experience in that definition?
Everything
Like as
there
a
is, everything there is to know about the universe, everything beyond the universe, everything in existence and outside of existence would happen if you had a true full ego death.
And so in you bringing that up, was there like have you ever experienced that yourself, do you think?
Oh yes. Everything I do today is because of that ego death.
And has it only happened one time, or can it happen multiple times?
It can happen multiple times. It can happen
But
multiple. It's happened to me multiple times.
okay.
Yeah, it's happened to me multiple
Uh,
times. But not every experience I've had ended up in an ego death. No. Ego
mhm.
death is very hard to come by. Very difficult to come
Yeah,
by.
I would
But
definitely
there are
agree.
many cases where the other thing that people are talking about, that the ego defense is falling apart, that's happened to me multiple times.
Mhm.
Right? But when your ego is falling apart, your sense of self is still there. It's still there. It's just you're now experiencing the different layers of the egoic aspect, which you can't see, of course, but you can sense the different layers of that ego falling apart or dissolving.
Yeah.
But if
I
there's
think
something
I've
still,
gotten there.
go ahead.
I think I've gotten there. Like in hearing this definition, and I've heard this one before too, like what you just described. And in that sense of an ego death, personally, I do think that I've experienced more of like the defenses devolving. And I think I have experienced an ego death, but not of my own will. So like it's not because I could think myself into an ego death. It was the, the environment around me that allowed that to escape. Like where I don't think I had I did not have a sense of self. Like this body and all this stuff did not exist. Like, but I was still a part of the earth, like as you were saying, like that I still existed and I could experience almost everything. Yeah, just like everything could be experienced through this vessel. But even the idea of my body, like it did not exist. And when I came back to consciousness or back to my ego, um, then it was like I was looking at myself much differently. I'm like, whoa, like that's what my self looks like. Like that's what I get to put all of this energy into. Like if you think of like energy like atoms and things like that, and that everything is made of it, like some of it gets to be put into me, and here I am. So that was I do think it's something to be experienced. I would definitely recommend if there's a way for others to facilitate that, to get themselves there. I don't know for you, Morgan, like if there's ways that you would recommend, like that you think really helps people to get there, because I do think it's necessary to understand that you're not this body, like you're everything else, like, and everything is you.
The best advice I can give is just to let go of everything, which is very difficult to do. It's the easiest thing.
Yeah.
It's a difficult thing to do. It's so easy, it's difficult.
Yeah.
Right? But that's all you have to do
Why
is
is it
over
so
everything.
difficult?
What was that?
Why is it so difficult?
Because the ego doesn't want to die.
Why? Yeah. I don't want to die. That's what it was. I don't want to die.
Yeah, I don't want to die. So the ego will do everything to cling on. And it's the strongest thing ever. So trying to get it to, and remember, when you're trying to get the ego to die, what's doing that? It's your ego. So it's like a feedback.
Yeah.
It's your ego that's trying to get
Oh
your ego
boy.
to die, and the other half of your ego says, "I don't want to die. You crazy?" Right? So it holds on to that with all its might. Right? But if you can let go, if you can let go, which I mean by just surrendering yourself, letting go of all your defense mechanisms, letting go of everything that makes you up as the sense of self, ego death occurs. You have to crucify the ego for it to resurrect itself. So an ego death is not permanent. When you have one, you come back to yourself again. That's your resurrection, and then you move forward. All right. So that's the other thing. When people talk about ego death, saying that's a permanent thing, that's where people are wrong. It's not a permanent thing. All states are temporary. None of those states are permanent. They're all temporary states. I know
This is true.
I think Nathan had something to say. I can feel it.
It's in my face. Just,
Yeah, something in your face, like, yeah, it's a burning something to say. I don't know if it's a question or a comment. You got,
yeah, I got a question. Why is everybody in such a rush to get their ego, kill their ego? Like, why is it just feel? I know it's not doesn't feel great, right? It just feels like why? Just why? Just tell me why. What's the point of that?
well, just think about all the problems that are happening in your life, like all the internal mind chatter and the back and forth of you talking to yourself and questioning yourself and feeling having a lack of self-worth, low self-esteem, or
Yeah.
too much self-esteem, or feeling that you're more than whatever, what's the term, grandiose, and the list goes on. So all the things that are happening in your head internally, all that stuff causes a person suffering. And when I say suffering, I don't mean extreme suffering to the point where you're like dying or something like that, but to the point where you're like, there's something that's happening inside of me and it's bothering me. It's disturbing. Sometimes I have good thoughts, sometimes I have bad thoughts, sometimes I feel depressed, sometimes I feel great. Sometimes I have fears of whatever. I have issues when it comes to safety. All that stuff is stuff of the ego. So these are things that the ego is supposed to do. So people get to a point where they want to get relief from that. And that's really all it is from that standpoint. I just want to get relief from myself. All right. But when you go deeper and you go deeper, especially when it comes to, say, for example, like if you're walking on a spiritual path, the only way to spiritual enlightenment is the death of the ego. There's no other way around that. Your ego has to die temporarily for you to attain enlightenment.
I would agree.
And when you experience any form of spiritual awakening, it doesn't even have to be enlightenment, but if you experience any form of spiritual awakening, you get a sense of what could happen if you're able to let go of the whole thing.
Yes, that
right?
part.
And that's where people start to search. When it's like, you know what? I need to search this through. I need to see this through, because based on what I just personally experienced, I want to see that to the very end. And that could start a path to trying to attain spiritual liberation up to the levels of nirvana or moksha. Right. So that's why people do it. Everybody in themselves feels something. And as much as we know that the ego is important and that we need an ego, because you can't do anything without an ego, right? Because especially if you're having an ego death, for those who've experienced it, you can't do anything when you're having ego death. Your body is not responding to the outside environment. Your body just does anything because it's experiencing no sense of self. And if you have no sense of self, your body is either totally still or you lost all your bodily motions. Because you have no sense of self that's governing everything that's happening in your body, right? So it's not something that you want permanently, right? Because if you did that, people have to take care of you for the rest of your life, right? You probably don't want that, right? But temporarily, you can have an experience And it doesn't even have to be full ego death. It could just be, as I was mentioning earlier, the lowering of the defense mechanisms, and that alone can set you on a path where you want to experience the whole big shebang, right? But not only not just experience it, but in a way that when it happens, that it changes you, that you are being transformed by that experience, so that you become your full potential as a human being, as the relative mind, the mind with the developed ego, so to speak.
Because, okay, the question that I had, so to maybe this will make sense what I want to know, which is, do you think that people who, for instance, right now have mental health issues such as schizophrenia, or borderline personality disorder, you know, these are the terms that have been born in modern psychology. Do you think that these people are like they are an example of that they have allowed their egos to die permanently? Like they're still in that ego death, like they have not returned back to a state that allows them to function. Like you were saying that if you stay in an ego death state, then people would have to take care of you for the rest of your life. And do you think that's because of like the society, the way that it is, that's why you cannot function in an ego death state? Like, is there situations that could exist for people to live well in ego death? If that makes sense.
Can't be done. You need a sense of self to survive in your as the relative mind. Anyway, people who are going through schizophrenia, having personality disorders, all that stuff is still ego. None of that is a lack of ego.
Okay. And how do you or explain more about that? Yeah.
Yeah, all of it is still ego. It's just their egos may not be fully functional or properly functioning, right? But that's all still ego. So if a person has personality disorders, that person just has less of a distinction between because the ego is not, as you know, it's not just one thing, as you mentioned earlier. It's a combination of different aspects or different facets of the same thing, right? So you have, if you want to split it down the middle, you have a feminine side and you have a masculine side. And if you took those two sides, you can also dissect those. You can divide those into parts itself. So you can have different aspects or different facets of the feminine and different facets of the masculine. All have their own parts. So you may have multiple personalities that if one of those personalities was isolated and it was doing its own thing, it would be the poet. It could be the poet. The poet, and he always speaks with "thou art," as opposed to saying, you know, it would only do those things. I'm just making up these crazy examples, but it would only do those things. You can have another a facet of that part of the ego that is the I don't know, the scientist. Again, I'm just making these up. It could be like the scientist, very logical, very this, very that, very analytical, and speaks with a scientific type of voice. And then on the other side, you could have, I don't know, it could be the wrestler. Again, I'm just making these, I'm just pulling them out of the hat. It could be the wrestler, and he probably, and that ego or that aspect of the ego probably has like a Hulk Hogan voice or something, or like a Mr. T voice. Ah, Peter the Fool, right? But when I say voice, I don't not necessarily saying something vocal. It's just the essence of that ego could have that idealistic view of a wrestler, and the list goes on of all the different parts. Now, when a person has multiple personality disorder, either they can control it or they don't have control over which voice is going to take over. And when that voice takes over, depending on the person, some of the other aspects of the ego can witness that voice being operating while the rest of the egos stay in the back burner, and they watch that that particular personality play out, or the other egos have no memory as this part of the ego plays out, because it just shuts down and has no memory of knowing or having any way of knowing when this particular ego takes over and is taking the platform in that moment. So those things, but that's just an ego that's just not properly operating in the way that an ego is quote unquote supposed to operate. Because with everyone's ego, there's
Mhm.
an executive. There's a person who, there's a thing that's on top, and it governs all the different aspects of the ego, going all the way down to the id. So you can say the id is like the mailroom. It's the basement. It's the mailroom.
Mhm.
Happens below the while everything else that's happening above that is the more higher functions of the ego, going all the way up to the executive, or up to the chairperson, or up
Mhm.
to the CEO. Right. So when a person has multiple disorders, and some people are able to have this ability, and it's not necessarily a disorder. Some people have the ability to go in and out of personalities, and they can do this with ease. But they have control
Mhm.
over that. Right. In those cases, that's probably more of an ability than it is a disability. But there's people who can do that. But it's all happening by the ego. So it's not a lack of ego, in my opinion. It's all ego. It's just that within that individual, those individual egos could be more. They're probably more distinct within their functions and how they whatever, while all the other parts shuts down. But in the average person with who has an average like healthy ego, um, when I speak to you, Elle, or if I speak to you, Nathan, I'm speaking to the amalgamation of all the egos together, in a sense. Though one facet of your sense of self could be more prominent than all the other ones. So when I look at Elle as the poet, I'm getting Elle the poet with all the other functionalities with that, as opposed to just getting the poet and nothing else. Right? Or if I'm talking to Nathan, I'm getting Nathan the comedian, but I'm getting all the stuff of Nathan. But Nathan as the comedian is what is prominent over all the other ones. But as a functional human being, they're all there.
So it's like Power Rangers when they all
I swear you told this joke before.
yeah, but it's so
Did I cut it the first time? You trying to pull it in
Power
again?
Rangers
Or
is
what
life.
happened?
you know
Power
how okay
Rangers is life.
no, just like okay, you got the red, he's the the head guy, right? And you got the blue, the yellow, the black one, and then they all come together and they form that stupid Megatron thing, whatever they fight this
I
beast of
swear you
demon.
said this exactly the same the last time.
Yeah, but it just makes so much sense. And then the head guy is the Red Ranger. He's fucking. I'm sorry, I always take it
But you know
back to
what though?
cartoons.
Let's go a little deeper than that, because as much as you're
Uh,
using the Power Rangers, let's use. Are you familiar with Voltron?
no.
Okay, so look
What is
up
this?
when we're done with this. Look up
Oh,
Voltron,
is that in
What's that from again?
Transformers? Transformers?
not Transformers. Look up Voltron.
Voltron.
Right, Voltron,
We're
Defenders
all
of the Universe. But there's two Voltrons. There's one Voltron which has the 5 lines, which makes up the robot that makes up the being, right?
Okay.
But there's another one.
legendary.
But there's another one. It was a Voltron that had like 16 vehicles. I think it was 16. I can't remember how many. I think it was like 16 vehicles, and they formed Voltron.
Is this in Thundercats? Give me the cartoon, because I can't think of it. Voltron. It does sound
Just look
familiar.
it up. You always do this. Like, you have
Oh,
access to the internet. Just look up Voltron.
yeah.
We're in a podcast.
So
I'm
it's
not
the
Jamie.
legendary
No, I'm
defender.
not saying do it now. I'm just saying when we're
Okay.
done, look up Voltron. Look up
Okay.
the two different. There's
Yeah,
two
so
different
it was
ones.
made into
Say it again
15
now.
vehicles,
Is it 15?
15 vehicles created on Earth, and they were divided into 3 teams of 5, known as the land, sea, and air teams.
There you go.
Which, yes, like, and it's so true because in so many like animes, cartoons, they do use this idea of like these, these facets of like, oh, they'll say like land, sea, and air, or they'll use some elements, but it always kind of relates back. It's like from this core idea
Yeah.
of like these selves, the ego, the id,
Yeah.
and trying to control them. And
trying to
they always
control
just
them,
try to different ways of how we're trying to the evil. There's always some big evil thing that's getting you off of your path, and you have this purpose. And I think that, yeah, we can learn a lot actually from those things. So thanks
Even
for
using
bringing up
that.
the Power Ranger again, Nathan.
Yeah, Nate. Yeah.
But I do think that you should try to use some other cartoons.
Because like, bro, I can't finish editing that segment. Like,
I'm gonna keep saying it until it gets
Yes.
into a
You know
fucking
what?
video.
Make it a thing. Yeah, make it a thing.
too funny.
Make it a
Yeah,
thing.
but it's a great example. Even though the ego is even more complex than that, because the ego, in Buddhism, they mention, I don't have the number. There's like 40 or 45 selves within the self. They talk about that, right? I think it's 40 or 45 or something like that. But your ego is made up of so many different facets. And as you're talking every day, you're operating from all these different facets that is allowing your ego to express itself as Morgan or as Nathan or as Elle. Right. But if you have certain experience, especially with psychedelics, especially like say, for example, LSD, you can actually go in and zero in on each of these different facets of the ego and you can study them. All right. You're probably not able to study them in real time in the moment, but you can witness them and you can see what each part of the ego is doing. And it could be so detailed to the point where by you just witnessing them can allow the ego to become more functional when you come back, when you're back into when you're out of the trip. You can become more functional just because you witness each aspect of each facet of the ego by looking at each one of them, witnessing them and seeing what they do. And so that you have more awareness of what each one does. So that when you come back, you can actually operate in a much higher functional state because you went in there and looked at them one by one. And you may not be able to do all of them in one session, but it's a start. And then you go back in again and you look at other aspects of the ego. And this is probably infinite, right? But each time you go and you look at each aspect of your ego when you come back, it'll take some time. But when you come back, your ego can develop and become more functional because of that experience.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense.
Right.
I definitely agree with, or it resonated with me when you said, you can witness them versus being able to study them in real time, depending on, I guess, maybe even the dosage and stuff like that. But I love the idea of having that intention for the trip. Because I do think psychedelics are, for me, the reason that helped me, one of the things that has helped me to meet myself a little deeper, by doing just that, like not just using it as an opportunity to escape myself, but actually go into myself
And do
and
some
see
work.
what's there. And yeah, and use it, especially what you said, applying it after and saying, now that I know that about myself, that I can be that kind of person, or I can think these kind of things, or those are where some of my attachments lie. I was able to do a lot of shadow work and undo some of those ideas about who I thought I was and where I want to be, what I want to do, and who I really am. Especially what you were saying before, Morgan, about, that there's a lot of things that, the person that you, I guess, are most proud to be, like your best self, your authentic self, the one that's doing things out of like your intuition versus what your performance, like you're trying to appease somebody or please somebody. You're just doing it because this is what makes you happy. Just even having the idea of that, I think, helps you to choose the way to go in every given moment when you actually have an awareness of it. If you don't, then how would you know that there's even an idea of performing, that you're not operating from your, I guess, your ideal or authentic self? So many selves, so many selves.
So many selves,
But
right?
yes.
And
Yes.
there could also be the argument that as much as you can witness your authentic self, because again, I'm not talking about the ultimate self. I'm talking about when you get behind, what Nathan was talking about earlier about, when you get to the core of what your actual sense of self is, when you come back, you may not be able to do that 100% because the sad part is, I shouldn't even say it's a sad part, it's just part of nature, that everything that you are, or everything that you think you are, and no matter how deep you go with it, trying to find your authentic self, we're not just the self. We're a combination of other people. I'm part of a group. I'm a part of a collective. And if I wanted to truly be acting from my authentic self, my super ego, which is my collective, may not allow me to 100%. Because there's a consequence. There may be consequences for my actions, even if my actions are good. But maybe, like, let's say, for example, and this has been an actual argument. I didn't even argue it because there's some point, there's times where I'm like, I'm not even going to argue this. There's just no point in me arguing this. I just going to let it be. But if I wanted to help a group, someone up a different group, could be a different ethnic group, the argument would be, you always want to help those people. You should be looking out for your own. Right? I think everyone should look out for their own. But that there's no argument of me not helping my own. It's just there's a group of people that deserves being defended or whatever the case is. But the person who's very ethnocentric will say, you're always looking out to help other people. It's like you're trying to please other people. You don't care about helping your own, even though that's not the case, but they would say that. How do you argue that? It's like, I can sit here and argue this all day, but it's not going to get me anywhere. The person's still going to have that opinion or that belief, because in their mind, you should only help your own.
That's true. And anything outside of that.
Anything out of that. So if something arises in the future, I have to think about that every time I help other people. Because the criticism that's going to come back is Morgan only wants to help other people, even though that's an exaggeration, because that's not true. But that's what's always going to keep coming back, because in other people's eyes, why would you want to help other people? It should only be your own. And some people are like this with their families. Don't go out there and offering more of your time and energy to other families. You should help out your family. Our family is struggling. Help out your family. And if you did anything outside of that, within the family, it may be considered to be wrong. Even though from your standpoint, you just maybe just be just a very highly moral person. Right? But within that group, you're going against the rules, the ethics of that group. And that can come off as you being enemy number one, public enemy number one within the group. So what do? So you probably still go out and you try to help others, but you always have to keep in mind, shit, I have to make sure that I'm doing this for the group. But the only reason why you're doing it to that extent, because the group has made a comment, or someone in the group has made a comment that you're not doing enough for our group. So you've been influenced by the group, the same group that is not allowing you to be to fully express yourself from an authentic standpoint by helping someone who is in need of help at this time. Because it's not like there's two groups and you had to choose one between the two groups. It's just in this instance, someone outside the group needs help, and you're going out and you feel that you're going to go out of your way to help that group. And people are like, why are you doing that shit? You should only help your group. Right? So there you could be slightly influenced by your group. So the question is, can a person always be authentic to themselves? My answer is, while you're in the group of others, you probably can't, at least not fully.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Honestly, like honestly, Nathan's the Power Rangers, it's stuck in my head now. Now I just keep seeing them like all assembling up and like making their big Megatron. But just thinking about that, like, yeah, if any of the Rangers jump out of that Megatron, it all falls apart.
Right?
The collective mission no longer exists because somebody had this individual want, like, that they thought was more important than the group. And so can you operate out of your own authentic interest? Like, maybe you do have the interest to save the world, but also you're hungry and you wanted to, I don't know, you wanted to leave Megatron. Like you wanted to appease your, or maybe like, I don't know, like usually
you mentioned Megatron and probably the same conversation.
What?
No, you can't.
I know, sorry. I know, sorry. Not
I think it was killing Nathan. I think Nathan wanted to mention it.
What was the big thing that the Power Rangers made? What did they make? I forgot what their thing was called. It's been a while.
Tron. That's always a Tron at the end of it.
Yes, it's always a Tron. It's always a electronic. But yeah,
Megatron was from Transformers. We have Power Rangers, and we have Voltron.
And all of those shows show that they had to come together, like, in order to defeat like the bigger. There's always a collective mission. Like, so if there's a collective mission like on Earth, which is like our survival as a people, it doesn't seem like we can survive all by ourselves. Like, you could go to the jungle and like try to duke it out with like the animals or whatever, but in order to kind of live in this society, it feels to me that you have to team up. Like, you have to, like, as you were saying, it's either your family will put this obligation on you that, hey, it's us against the world, or you get into a marriage and then it's us against the world. You build your own family, you start instilling that to people. And And yeah, so do you ever get to be yourself? Like,
And you know what?
how can, yeah,
And you hear
what
this,
is that?
and sometimes you hear this with in regards to heroes, community heroes, people who are strong social activists, political activists, and the list goes on. But when you talk to their family, from their standpoint, that guy was the worst father ever because he was never there.
The worst.
Yeah, the
Honestly.
worst guy ever. Yeah, he's like a community hero, or she's a community hero, or one of the cases. But when it comes to he or she doing their duties as a parent, from the children's standpoint, or from the wife or husband's standpoint, worst person ever. They abandoned their family
Mhm.
in sacrifice of the world or of the community or whatever. So it's like,
And relate to that.
what do you do, right? What do you do? You probably don't
And
have the
lose
energy
the
to do
real
both.
self.
Say it again.
Exactly. On
Mhm.
well, to your point, like, I can definitely relate to that, having kind of been, I think, a product of that environment of like seeing my family like out there helping the world, but then inside our home was, it was hard. And it's, but to me as an adult, what I've come to realize and kind of forgive is that who has the energy for all that? Like, now that I'm trying to do all of those things as well, I am also trying to balance it out a bit more, so I have more pockets where I get to be myself, I think, is what the difference is between what I saw my family doing versus what I'm trying to do. I have more time to myself so that I can express myself a little more authentically in each of those places, like not being completely like this community leader giving it all away, and then at home being this monster tyrant, can't stand anybody. And it's so funny because well, not funny, I know it's the universe working its way. Today I do like these mini talks to myself. Self-talk, I think, is very important, helped me to understand myself better. So I'll talk to myself like on my way home, especially in commuting, because I can't stand traffic. And so like I tell myself, I'm like, the traffic in my mind is the traffic in the street, and so let's talk about it. Just like talk to myself. And today's topic was, I was talking about the fact that uh it's very difficult like to always express myself exactly the way that I want to, in fear of offending someone, because I have this boundary that I would like to put up. I don't want this thing done to me. Like, maybe I don't want you to touch me when you're talking to me. That's actually a thing for me. Like, when people speak to me, I can hear you. I'm very good at hearing. I also can see. So I don't need somebody to like tap me to like keep me engaged in the conversation. But some people do that as a way, it might be unconscious. They don't even know they're doing it, but it really, it's a irk of mine. And sometimes I won't tell them. I won't tell them. I'll allow them to keep on touching me. And I'm getting angrier and angrier. I'm not even listening to what they have to say. And now the communication's about to break down, but it's because I have not expressed what I really need to be fully present. I actually need you to stop touching me to be present.
Be present.
Like, that's what's going to keep me present. But you touching me is going to, but when I've exercised that, like when I've said, okay, I'm going to tell this person, like, next time that happens, I'm saying this thing. So I'll be like, hey, you don't need to touch me to keep me engaged in the conversation. They're like, that's not what, like, what? I'm not, like, they get offended because I pointed out, like, I didn't like this thing. And I guess now they feel ashamed that they've been doing this, or I don't even know. Sometimes they care. Yeah, defense. Complete defense. Like, and I don't, in saying all of this, it was just that I've been contemplating this a lot, like thinking about, how do I express myself authentically to people so that what they want doesn't impede what I need. Like, I'm trying to be on the same page with them. I want to communicate well. And I, all of this, all those talkings to myself, meanderings, I realized that I do have to just keep doing what I'm doing. Like, I still have to continue to enforce my boundaries in those kind of cases, because some people, they will not speak to me again. It has happened, like, where they're just like, oh, well, you're the kind, you don't want anyone to touch you or whatever, like, you're that kind of person. I'm like, okay, fine. Like, and honestly, that has brought me more peace. In the moment, I felt turmoil, maybe for 5 minutes. I was just like that ego death, I guess, kind of like, where I'm just like, oh my God, but it was temporary. The pain flooded away. And now I feel better that one less person who's not going to railroad me into like being someone who I'm not. I am an affectionate person. I give hugs, but I like, that is a thing. I'm just like, yo, when you're talking to me, you don't have to touch me. Like, I actually prefer my personal space. Which it's weird. It's kind of like that. It doesn't make sense with my personality, I guess, for some people, because, oh, you're supposed to be like a loving person. You give love all the time. Like, you teach yoga, you preach love, and what, you don't want me to touch you when I'm trying to be nice to you. It's not they're being mean. I just like, yeah, I don't know. It's just something that small thing, I see it like in other areas too, with bigger boundaries that I have. I just use that small one because the other ones are a little bit too deep, I think, for this show. But yeah, just as an example. So
You need to,
great topic. Great topic.
you need to pull out a sign every time you have a conversation, like one of those cartoon characters.
Don't touch.
Just pull it. Yeah, just don't
Like
touch
the coyote and and the roadrunner.
Yeah.
Don't touch.
Don't touch me.
That's interesting. So that goes into the category. What's something that the ego does is the ego creates shadows, dark shadows. It also creates golden shadows as well. Nathan, are you familiar with the term of shadows?
I think they said golden showers. I'm like, what?
I did not
Golden-
say golden
I
shadows.
also
my-
thought that for a second.
Oh, sorry.
Don't get me wrong though. Every time I read that in psychology books, that's the first thing that pops in my mind too. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah. It
So
always pops in my head.
golden shadows. I've
Gold-
never heard that term.
golden
golden
shadows.
shadows.
So there's dark shadows and there's
Mm.
golden shadows. So of course the dark shadows are the things that you repress. They disturb you. They're shameful, and because they're so dark and shameful and disturbing, we push them aside, or we push them deep down into our psyche. We push them down into the unconscious, the subconscious part of the mind. So these are things that we disown. So anything that you disown, you push into the subconscious of your mind. But we also do that with things that we really, really love. So just say, for example, there's a musical artist or a celebrity that you're fond of. You could be so fond of this person that you probably have those qualities as well, but you've disowned them within yourself and you seek them in other people. And that would be considered the golden shadow.
Say that one more time. One more time.
The whole thing. Just say there's someone that you're fond of. People do this all the time. With it could be anything. It could be okay. I can't speak for you, but has there ever been a time when you were younger as a female, the thing that was on your mind was boys? Boys,
Yes.
or at least you know someone who did that. Boys, oh my gosh, boys. But as you get older, the male figure is still part of that. You still have an attraction to that, but it's not. You don't create your world from that. This is one of the many things that you love, but you don't create a world of, oh my gosh, I have to do whatever to get this boy. But when you're younger, there's a thing where that you may idolize someone, you may be fascinated by someone, and you see everything through the eyes of that person or that type of person, right? You could be creating a golden shadow. Now, there's nothing wrong with that when you're 12 years old, 15, 16 years old, because that's the psychological growth that you go through. Everyone goes through that. Males would be females, females would be males, or it could be same sex, whatever the case is. But we all go through that. If you're still going through that at age 50, well, that could be a problem, because that part of the ego never got to mature and go up the psychological stages of development. So even though you at 50 years old has gone through and reached the age of 50, but that part of the ego that sliced off, that kind of broke off of the main ego, stayed at 16 years old with that fascination of boys, right? And you still see this, like, you hear celebrities talk about this when they talk about groupies, and they talk about the older groupies that they've been hearing about from since the 60s or whatever the case is, are still around trying to sleep with boy groups or whatever the case is. So that girl's been doing that from since she was whatever age, and now she has kids, she has grandkids, but never broke out of it. So now to the younger musician, she just comes off as creepy, right? But that's considered like a golden shadow that she's developed and never matured from that. right? And it could be the opposite, like what I said before, the dark shadow of things that you repress, the things that are shameful to you, or shameful to the group, or shameful to the community that you're a part of. And you may have feelings towards this thing, but because it's there, you have to take that and push that aside because you disowned it. And that could be considered a dark shadow. So shadows can create either an allergy or an addiction. So in an allergy sense, like what I just mentioned about the dark shadow, it could be I get triggered every time someone touches me. Right? There's a reason why that trigger is there. And not that it's a bad thing. It's just you've developed that somewhere down the line. Because if the average person gets touched by someone, they may not think anything of it. They probably realize this person is really touchy-feely. But they probably, whatever. Yeah. But for you, it could be like a thing where it's like, listen, man, don't
it's like
touch me.
allergy.
Right? Could be for safety reasons, could be it reminds you of someone from back in your past. It could be a number of different things. And then you end up creating an allergy. And on the other end, it could be something that you're so attracted to, you gravitate towards it, you need it in your life. Every time it comes up, your face lights up. It's like, if I could just have, it could be like, I don't know, it could be a specific meal or something. It's like, oh my gosh, every time when I see whatever, my mouth waters, and or if I can just have that thing, and that could be considered, on an extreme, it could be considered a golden shadow. So the first one I mentioned would be the allergy, and the other one I mentioned would be the addiction. And we all have them, right? To different degrees. So our job is to, because the ego is doing this. The ego, this is why, going back to Nathan's question, the reason why certain people try to see if they can get away from the ego is because after a while, these things start to weigh on you. Golden shadows and dark shadows, they start to weigh on you because the ego, as long as you have an ego, your ego will develop shadows. So your job is to go inside, look at each shadow, and integrate the shadow back into the ego, as opposed to it being splitting off and creating a life of its own and doing its own thing. And every time you're encountered with it, you're triggered by it. Or it could be the opposite. You're extremely gravitated towards it. So these are things that the ego does. So these are the quote unquote bad things that the ego does. The ego is not a bad thing. The ego is a good thing. Well, it's both. It's a double-edged sword. All right. So to have an ego, which is the sense of self, it comes with all this other stuff. And that's what creates the positive and the negative human experience. So it doesn't matter what level you're at. It doesn't matter where you are spiritually. From the bottom all the way to the top, you will always find shadows that you may have to work on. Myself, Nathan, you included, everyone, we have to work on these things, if you choose to anyway. Because if you don't, especially if you're on a spiritual path, it robs you of your consciousness that you need to get to higher states of consciousness. And you can't do that without having the amount of energy or mileage to do that. So by healing the ego, by confronting and integrating your shadows, it gives you more of the energy or more of the mileage that you need to reach these higher states of consciousness.
Yes, I definitely choose to. And I thank you for this terminology of golden shadows as you were speaking.
You almost said golden shower. You almost got a thumbs up from R. Kelly just now.
Okay, because I was gonna say earlier that it's interesting that you mentioned about the groupie, because I was just like on the reverse side, like the king of golden showers. He's a perfect example of someone who did not let go, or like had golden shadows created around him. He created golden shadows.
Oh yeah.
And
strong ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Channeled them into golden showers. Which
actually led to that. Exactly.
Exactly.
And it's now caused them a whole lot of problems. And that's an extreme example of someone with golden shadows. Yeah.
And yeah, celebrities are a great example. And even any of us here in this chat, like, being performers, like, or being speakers, people who speak to public crowds and audiences, you could develop those really easily. So I think this is such an important conversation for me at this, like right now, this pivotal point when, you know, I'm performing more and people are giving lots of accolades and stuff like that. And I've been, oh, and that's why I started the conversation with myself this morning, because I'm like, I've been absorbing a lot of energy lately. And it's not that it's negative energy, it's mainly positive. Like, you know, people saying like, wow, and you're doing so good, like all likes and all these kind of things. Almost nothing negative about my performance lately, which is a difference from before. Like I used to get some like, I think almost made me feel like people were telling me to sit down and shut up. Almost, maybe it was just my mind like taking in what they were saying, like things like, oh, I see you everywhere, like things like, I don't know, I don't take that as a good compliment. I see that as like a negative, like it's an underhanded backhand, like why aren't you home doing your work? Maybe it's me again thinking about like, why am I not home doing my work? If people are seeing me everywhere, that's too much. Like, and so all of that to say,
or do I have to see you everywhere? Like, really? Do I have to see you? Yeah. So it's like, oh, I see you everywhere. Because I got that the other day. So someone,
right.
yeah, someone sent me a put a comment on my IG thing. It's like, you're just like you're everywhere.
That's how I take it. That's
like,
how I take it. That's how I take
I took
it.
offense to it. I was
I'm like, oh no,
okay.
they're sick
What
of
do you want me
me.
to do?
Like, yeah,
Man,
they're sick
I'm gonna
of me.
turn on my phone.
I'm gonna stay home. Honestly. Honestly, thank you for like just
Oh, yeah.
validating that, because sometimes some people think I'm crazy when I bring it up. I'm like, so this person has told me like 6 times now that they see me everywhere, but if we're seeing each other, doesn't that mean they are also everywhere? I'm like, so
That's true.
like I was getting confused by it. But I started to realize that that was just me overthinking it. And I think it's actually a catchphrase now to say, I see you everywhere. Like it's like a thing people say. At least I'm taking it that way now and throwing it, like leaving it alone. But then now I'm in a position where I'm finding that I started reserving my energy, because I guess like in response to that, I was just like, you know what? I'm having too many thoughts about this. I am going to stay home and do more work. It makes me feel better to not hear those comments. So I did those things, and now I'm actually performing some of the things I've been working on. So I guess it kind of worked out. And now I'm getting positive reviews like on what I've been doing, like, oh wow, like I've never heard you do that before. And I'm just like, okay, yeah, true. I was in my room practicing all the time. But what I was like, now where I'm at is that also, as much as it doesn't feel that good, if I'm being honest, like it scares me to receive so much positivity. Like I guess I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop, like where I'm just waiting for people to hate me again and be like, I see you everywhere.
You see what the ego
Yes,
does?
what is it doing?
Yeah, and that's what it does. All right. So now you're like, okay, I'm getting all these positive reviews, but positive feedback. I'm just waiting for that big bad one. All right. And then that starts to haunt you. Maybe not in an extreme way, but it's enough that it just nags at you over and over and over and over again until you got nothing left. Yeah.
It's true.
Performers go through a lot.
Honestly.
Yeah.
It's
any type of public figure, they go through a lot. There was a girl, that was years ago, I was at this Filipino festival, and I was there with a comic friend of mine, and a girl came up to me and she said, every time I turn on the TV, this is when I was doing TV, every time I turn on the TV, there you are. And she took her hands, she tried to formulate the remote control. She just kept doing this. I never forgot.
Like to turn you off?
Every time I turn on the TV, there you are. She's trying to turn me off. She walked away. I'm just like, ugh, that was nasty.
Or was she saying like, hey, I'm switching the channels and you're on every one?
It could be that, but still, she's trying to get rid of me.
I know, but the delivery,
every channel she goes, I'm still there. It's still bad, right?
What kind of cable package does she have? What kind of?
I know.
She has. Oh my God.
Yeah, either she was trying to turn off the TV or trying to switch to the other channel. I'm still there. So it's still bad from her standpoint. Yeah, it's like you're always there. Now you're in my face in person. The first time I've ever seen her in person. So yeah, I was
and
just,
how did you
she was smiling
like inside? for you, like, what did that do to you, or like, did it have any effect on you when that happened?
Maybe subconscious is probably why I left TV. You never know.
Honestly, no,
Like, think about it.
honestly,
Like, you know what I mean? You
honestly,
never know.
yeah,
All right. Because it's people
yeah,
that, why'd you leave? I don't have an actual full answer for that. But maybe it's like little things like that that accumulates.
yeah,
You're like, oh, you know what? Let me maybe I shouldn't be here anymore. I don't know. It's possible. When you're thinking about the unconscious mind, right? The part that you have no awareness of. And all this stuff is
yes,
happening under your awareness, and it's making up who you are, and it's controlling your thoughts and your actions, and helping you make
it's
all those decisions, right? So even though I laugh at that, it could be one of many reasons why. You never, who knows? Because performers, again, um, a huge burden is carried on performers that average person wouldn't see, because from their standpoint, it should be glamorous. And
yeah,
some people are jealous of you for being there. So it's like, look at that person,
yeah,
look at her, look at him, not realizing that, yeah, there's a great side to that. But the other side of that is dealing with the negative feedback, or just negative reactions from people when it comes to certain things, or especially when people are trying to find a fault in you, and we all have them. So they can clearly find that fault and just take that and use it against you to always remind you that you're just like them.
yes. And I guess that's what it is with the positive comments, because sometimes even the positive ones, they come with like this negative connotation, like, you're doing everything. Like, I
You're doing
see you
everything.
everywhere.
I see
Like,
you everywhere.
please don't
Is there
feel
is
like,
there nothing you can't do?
yes, that too. And I'm like, oh my God, wait, like, or
Yeah,
like,
it's like I better slow
Steven
down.
sometimes will be like, leave room for some of us, or
Leave
like,
room for some of
uh,
us.
I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
what? Do work. Like, I'm working out here.
I'm trying to
Yeah,
work. I'm trying to
I don't
hustle.
know.
But yeah,
Yeah.
and that can
And I'm not
in your
even
mind.
thinking about, yeah, like, oh man, I'm not even thinking about like taking their room. I'm like, isn't there room for everyone? Like, isn't this space supposed to be so that everyone can come to it? Like, I think they invited everyone, so they wanted everyone to come, like as many people as possible.
But there's also
Um,
that fear of public
yeah,
speaking and things of that sort, which most people have. So if you're the one person that conquered that, right? I can have a strong jealousy towards you that you conquered that and I haven't. And it's not my issue. But now, because you have this issue, you've made it my issue by telling me, because that person is projecting, right?
yes.
That may
And
have
is
become
that
a
a
dark
way to
shadow for that
create?
person,
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like,
right?
they now create you said a golden shadow, right? They
That would
would
be the
create
dark shadow.
around you the dark shadow.
Yeah. They
So
can
if
also
they
sometimes be
revered
both,
you,
because a person can have a dark shadow and a golden shadow that they project onto you, because it can be both with
right?
individual. You can have
Yeah,
both, right? So there's
I've
that as
actually
well,
experienced that as well.
right? Because you
Like,
may
where
meet
somebody
someone who
came
admires
along
you so
who,
much and then hates you at the same
exactly,
time.
yeah. And then they didn't express the hate in a like outward kind of way.
It's
Like, they
passive.
came, they supported, they did more than anybody, like in terms of supporting me as a performer. But then one day they just like came and said like this feedback that was like unsolicited. And it was weird because, like, when you develop a relationship with someone where I'm sure you and Nathan could tell each other like feedback about, you'll tell Nathan about, you just said it
Yeah,
today,
Nathan
like
has no
about,
problem
hey,
telling me some shit.
jokes. Yeah, right? So it would be weird to like set it up in a way where it's like, I have to tell you something
I need to tell
about
you
your
this.
performance.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm just like, okay, like, go ahead. You come to everything. I ask you about my stuff after. Like, you always say it's great. And it's like, I gotta tell you, I've been lying. I don't think you're that good. Like, well, not in that way,
Not
but it
in
was
that way.
like,
Yeah, not
it
in that
was
way.
kind of like
But it can
all this
be
big, like this huge, like, I'm like, revelation. I'm like, wait. You were at everything. So what? You didn't
cheering
tell
me
me this
on,
from like 10
encouraging me.
shows ago? Like,
Yeah,
yeah, and
you
you're
just told me this at the
promoting.
time.
Whoa.
Yeah, and by
And
the
then
time they tell you, it comes
yeah,
off it can come off, I don't want to use the word, it can come off nasty. Um,
yes, it
yeah,
did a
it can
bit.
come off
It
that, it
did.
can come off condescending. There's many different ways it can come off, but you can tell it's a buildup of some form of
That's what it
resentment
was.
towards me,
Yeah,
or whatever the case is, right? Because
yeah.
the last thing the person needs or wants to feel that they became your shadow.
That's how, and it was
I
almost
like
like
to
I
feel
was
that
just
way.
like, wait, I wasn't Like you're not, yeah, that's spot on.com. I
Right.
think
This
that
is
was it.
why,
You were starting to feel like a shadow. And I
yeah,
was like, you were never meant to be a shadow. You put yourself there. And then now you resent that you're like the cheerleader. And you just need to have a bigger role. You need to be the director now, telling you, like, let me tell you how to do your shows.
how to do your show. And
Like,
this is
and you don't
probably
have it
why,
before.
and this is probably why in award ceremonies, celebrities, when they win an award, they thank so many people. Because if I
I
don't
get
thank
it.
you as a person, that would be held against me in the future. It's like, I've been by your side, I've been your cheerleader, I've done this, I've been part of your entourage, I've supported you the whole way, and you win a Grammy, you didn't mention me. How
Yeah.
dare you? And maybe you just forgot because you probably had to list off 50 people, right?
Thank you.
So you always have to make sure you mention your best friend, your number one supporter, all that stuff. Because if you don't, if you forget just one time, that person may start to hold a resentment towards you, because there's nothing greater than having their name mentioned associated with someone who everyone knows and admires, right? That's why
That's it.
it could be a blessing and a curse. The bigger you get, the more of a curse it can be while you're still gaining this great blessing.
It's so true, because how can you say all those names? Even Instagram only allows you 20 tags in a story.
Only 20
So
tags
like,
in the story. Yeah, if you got
who am I
21,
supposed to
you're ruined,
choose?
right?
Thank you. It
That's why that
happens all
person's
the
got to be
time.
number one, right? But who?
Yeah.
Everyone wants to be number one. So now you have to think about,
You know?
okay, my record label. Okay, I got to thank my record label, because without the record label, like I wouldn't be here. I got to thank my manager, my personal manager. That's got that I got to thank my publicist. I got to do that. I got to
What about
thank,
my mom? She knew
right?
me.
And
Like,
one's got to go to God,
yeah.
right? You have to say,
Yep.
so
You
say
have
first and
to.
foremost,
Well,
I want to thank the Heavenly Father. That goes right. So you only got so much time before they start playing the music.
thank you. Then you get played off. Then you're that person.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, this is an
And you can't
interesting
forget, you
world
gotta mention
that
your
we
makeup
live
artist,
in.
right? They make you look good. You don't mention that one friend who's there by your side the whole time, even though you've mentioned her or him the last 50 times. They won't say anything to you directly, but they'll start to build a resentment towards you. So to deal with that,
Yeah,
you
the same
thank
thing
them.
happened to Selena Gomez actually the other day. She got a kidney from her best friend, who is also an actress. And then when she won an award recently, or she had an opportunity to like speak on it, and she did not mention her, like didn't thank her. And I mean, obviously you can see just from what I said, she got a kidney from this girl. So I guess now every time she goes and does anything, she has to mention her, or else this girl gets like upset. And just like you said, a resentment started building to the point where she didn't mention her again on something. And this time the friend said something on social media about it, like, oh, guess, like, oh, not me, like underneath like the post, like, what about me, kind of thing.
Kidney bean.
And
Okay.
I don't know what to think about that, because I'm like, yeah,
That's a hard
you
one.
did give her a kidney, like,
So she did give
I
you a
guess you
kidney.
should thank you forever. Like, no matter what, you should be before God. Like, it should
Nah,
be my friend
Nah,
that gave me
man.
the kidney,
Girl gave me a
and then
kidney.
God.
nah, nah. Because like, at what point it's just
Comes
like
before God.
it's like what the like Kevin Hart's situation. Remember when he had to apologize? He went on the apology tour, and
Yeah,
at some point you gotta stop apologizing. Like you already apologized.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, it's true. And
this is my
after I
kidney now.
say I give you gratitude the first 75 times for giving me a kidney, I'm
you
assuming that
you know I'm
gratitude will
thankful.
stretch.
Like,
I can't say this
I'm
all the
very
time.
happy to be alive.
You're gonna
Yeah.
get a gift from me
So
every year. You're gonna get a gift. You're gonna get a card every year. You're gonna get one for giving me the kidney. But I think people are tired of me mentioning this on TV all the time. So you stop at some point.
right,
Like, but I gave you a
and that
kidney.
too.
Ooh, that's a
Yeah,
hard one.
that is very tough. Like, I had to put that whole story down, like, because I was like, actually, I don't know who's like right or wrong in this.
I
Like,
don't know
I
who's
don't
right
know
or
how
wrong in
I
this one.
feel. Like,
I'm torn
I
between the two.
totally see both sides. Like, I've said thank you enough, and also, hey, I gave you my kidney. Like,
She's like, did you give me the kidney for the
so
right reasons though? Because no,
that come on. Let's talk about it. Why did you give it to me?
well,
I thought you wanted to be alive. I'm here.
I'm here. I'm alive. I even gave you like a brand new car, and then I gave you like what? I bought you a house. What more do you
Yeah.
want? But I know I don't. When it comes to a
Oh.
kidney, I don't think there's any. I think it's priceless. Like I don't know. That's a tough one.
That's the thing.
That's why it's okay to
Moral
say no.
I was gonna say, I'm like, I think reasons why I would never, I can't say yes to that. Like, I don't even know for family member. Man, that's even hard too. Like, but I wouldn't want to see them die.
Now you gotta get it
I
from
think
somebody
family
who's dead.
member, pardon?
You gotta get it from someone who's dead so they can't complain.
That's what
They
I'm
can't
thinking.
complain. Yeah.
Organ donor. Let's go to the bank. Let's go to the bank.
That's a tough one. Because I'm like, if I gave you a kidney, Nathan, man, I think you better thank me for the rest of your life.
Nah, you need to die.
Yeah.
I gave you a kidney, bro. I didn't have to do that.
Oh wait, and then also, can you continue to bring it up like at family dinner? Like, remember that time I gave you a kidney, Nathan? Like,
Like,
no
yeah,
matter
I
what he
remember.
does.
You can just
Don't just take your kidney. Just have your kidney back, man. Get out of my back. What do you do? Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't want the kidney.
Or if you're just like, how's that kidney doing? Like,
yeah,
every
how's
meal-
my kidney doing? You taking care of my kidney?
yeah, like,
I'm watching your
oh,
diet.
I would.
You can't eat that.
Thank you.
You
It's
can't
like,
eat that.
oh, you know, you only have one kidney, right?
Yeah.
You're not allowed to drink.
What are you doing? You see, this is why you have one kidney in the first place.
every meal that you bring me over to a meal, every meal is like everything has kidney beans in it and shit. Just fucking
Anything that's good for your kidney, I give you. It's like we go to a restaurant.
Yeah.
I gotta choose. I gotta choose what you should eat because I'm like, listen, that's my kidney that you got there. It's like you're carrying my baby.
Or it's like,
That's my kidney.
waiter, do you have anything that's good for kidneys on the menu?
Yeah, anything
My
that's
friend
good for
just
kidneys
has
on the
a
menu.
kidney in his body. So trying to take care of that.
Yeah, that'd be crazy. I'd be texting you every day. So how's my kidney? How's my kidney doing? I have a kidney emoji that I send to you every day,
Yeah.
just to make sure you're taking care of my kidney. Wow,
Here's
that's a lot.
I'll be like, I'll send you this instead of the heart. I'll be like, my kidney.
My kidney.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
Oh
that's
my
too
gosh.
much. It's too much. Just let me die. Let me die.
Yeah, honestly,
I
because
don't say thank you like
I
that
think,
to anyone. That's too much. That's too many thank yous.
yeah, that's a lot. Like, I don't, your quality of life goes down, actually,
Just from
by
that alone.
accepting that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's a huge one.
Modern.
But entertainers, they take on a lot. That's probably why a lot of them have to go into therapy. Not only because of that, because also a lot of entertainers are already broken going into the business to begin with, right?
This is true.
So if you haven't
They
dealt
went
with any of
into-
that stuff through psychotherapy and things like that, you may end up having a hard time in the business because being around other people, especially people who are always possibly criticizing you or judging you or admiring you, you got to take on all that as an entertainer, and it's a lot. And if you haven't done the inner work to help you deal with that stuff, it can eat you alive.
Yeah.
But it is what it is. That's why I always tell entertainers, make sure you have the opportunity to work on your inner stuff, because if you don't, all that stuff you're gonna wear all that stuff on your sleeve in the future.
Yeah.
As we have like a few examples of the ego and what it does, and it does many other things, as we all know. But it's very interesting if you start to take the ego and start to break it down of all its different functions. Some of them are quote unquote negative, and other ones are positive. And we can go on for days about all the different functions of the ego. That's why I was saying earlier, when a person's under a certain substance, LSD does this better than other ones in regards to going into the psyche, looking at the psyche with a microscope, in a sense. If I use that as an analogy, and you look at different aspects of the ego, and you can see them clearly. You can't see them with your eyes, but you know what I mean. You know it's there because you can feel it.
Mhm.
It becomes very apparent when you're looking at all the different aspects, and you can break them down from bit to bit. You can go in and circle in on the id. You can look at all the psychological evolution of the id. You can see all that from archaic all the way up. You can do all that. You can see it from the archaic standpoint, and you can also, if you have the ability, if you've done the spiritual development, you can see it at the clear light level 2, the super integral levels of the self. All of that can be seen if you know what to look for.
It's true. It's a very enlightening conversation, honestly. It really like sheds light on it so that you can identify those shadows. And I think, not just become a person that kind of just is performing based off of things that you almost like you're not really aware of the different parts of yourself, so you can't really express like a true self, because there's not really a true self. Like, you haven't explored it, you don't think about it. So I enjoyed these conversations. I'm glad that thank you for bringing me on to talk about this stuff. And yeah, I'm definitely exploring the golden shadows more. Shadows.
Yeah. Again, we all have
Shadows.
them. No one's exempted from these shadows. Right?
Exactly.
Exempted. So it's our job to look at them. Now that we know that these things exist, how do I look at? And here's the thing: that in terms of finding dark shadows, it's very easy. All you have to do is anything that triggers you. That's a dark shadow.
Oh yeah, I forgot about those ones. I'm for some reason fixated on the golden, but
yeah,
maybe I should
dark ones too, right?
Shadows. Yes.
And then anything that fascinates you to such a degree is a golden shadow. And don't get me wrong, it's not like golden shadows are a bad thing. They're just telling you that you're projecting your qualities, your goodness onto someone else. Wow. So you see it in other people, but you don't see those things within yourself. But the reason why you see it in the other person is because you have those qualities. So that's why you notice it in other people. But you may be ignoring them. You may be disowning them and you're pushing them back for the sake of admiring this person. And the thing is, the problem is with golden shadows is when that person, quote unquote, lets you down. Doesn't live up to your idea, right? The idea of what you have of that person, or what's the other term? Like, when you put someone on the pedestal and you've created the ideal version of that person, and that ideal version of that person contradicts your how you see them, and you're let down by that. And that's when, the person with the golden shadow crumbles and says, what the fuck? I hate you, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you. And a whole bunch of other stuff can come out of that just because the person didn't live up to your idea of that person.
It's like watching someone a trailer for a movie and like, oh, the trailer looks so great.
So
and you watch the movie. And
it's like, a good example. It's not a Power Rangers analogy. That is a really, really good example.
Yeah, I was thinking about this for like a week now. I was just like,
for real, eh?
No, it's like, how do people view me? Like, I was trying to make a joke out of it. How do people view me? It's like, oh, they like the trailer. They like what they see when I go on stage and how confident I am. When I get off stage, it's like a totally different person. I'm not confident. I'm not, I'm me. I'm just being authentically me. And people do not like that shit.
People are disappointed. Yeah.
And it's like, why did he want to ask her? I don't understand. This movie makes no sense. Those fucking.
That is a great analogy. You fully redeemed yourself, by the way. Yeah. I love the Power Rangers analogy, by the way. I know Morgan's heard 1,000, but
I thought a good one at the time.
That also movie trailer. Ooh, I'm using that one.
That's a good one.
I love that. That is so. I resonate with that. I do think that's what it is. That's exactly what I was saying. That like when people are kind of like, oh, you're so loving and like peaceful, and if I'm not all those things all the time, then suddenly I'm the worst movie ever. Like there's like, no, that trailer lied. Like what garbage?
Yeah, you're nothing like what you appear to be.
Yeah,
and they start telling their friends. He's like, Elle, like, she's not like that in person, eh?
Oh no.
Yeah, she's not like that at all, eh? Just I want you to know
that trailer fool you.
Right, and it's just already start telling them about your faults. You know what she's like off stage, all that stuff, right? And there's no way around that, right? It happens to every entertainer. There's no way around that. But people like to have that extra information about you. When people see you a certain way, but you don't see them that way. So they see your friends see you that way, but they don't see the person who's associated with you in that manner. So the person, they have to let them know. It's like, she's just as human as we are. This is why. Right? There's celebrities that we know, Canadian celebrities who are huge celebrities, and all we know about them is the stuff that they did when they were young teenagers.
It's true.
Yeah, and no one will ever let those things go.
Never.
It's like, you know, that person's grown from that since then. Don't let it go. So yeah, but when we were in high school, this is how this person was like. They always did this a lot. They did that. They did this. They did that. And you're like, oh damn. But we didn't have social media and all this stuff back then, right? So just imagine now.
It's true, as if those things really define who you are now. You know, to bring it up in a conversation as if these are like facts, like, oh yeah, like take this in. This will really help you formulate your idea. Which I guess it can, because people can, but aren't we all capable of whatever? So like knowing that about that I did that like 12 years ago, if I say I'm not that person now, then even if I go back to that, it's not because I did that when I was 10. Like somebody could never do anything, like, you know, never hurt a fly and then become a serial killer.
Yeah.
Like, so.
And you can still be that person now, but you may not only see through that lens anymore. You may have multiple lenses that complements that thing. Or back when you're a kid, or back in your back as a young adult, you only saw things from that lens. So people know you for that. So 20 years later, 30 years later, you may still have that, but you found other aspects of yourself that may have value or lack value, whatever the case is. That if you saw that same thing in the pile of other aspects of the person, it wouldn't seem so bad. Right. But at that time, in your younger age, that's all people knew you for, because that was the reality that you were seeing things from. Right. And also that depends on, and it's worse depending on your gender, race, and all that type of stuff, because of course there's double standards through all these things, right? So certain things are held against you, and other things people may put you on the pedestal for.
It's so true.
Depending on who you are or who you represent. And I can't control how you think. I can only control what I do. Nathan, actually, any last thoughts, Nathan? You did so good with that trailer thing. I just want to say, keep it up.
You did good, kid.
just trying to perfect my movie, you know, just get the angles right. I don't know what I'm talking about.
But here's the thing, though, Nathan. Even if you perfect that movie to the best of your ability, someone will still watch your trailer, watch your movie, and still see something wrong with it.
As long as I'm satisfied, I don't give a damn.
That's what it boils down to. As long as I'm satisfied. The moment someone makes a critique about your movie, and you say, "Oh gosh, the person's right," they got you. Right? You didn't make the best movie that you could have made possible. That's where they got you. You want to be in the position where if someone criticizes your movie, you're like, I watched this movie through and throughout. And listen, I love what I created. It's not perfect, but it won awards. It did its thing. It made its money. It's changed people's lives. It did all these things, and I'm happy for it.
If you, just a quick thought, if you entertain any of their critique, because yes, you do believe that there were, like, you know, what you just said, like it wasn't perfect, especially in regards to filmmaking. If you take that in and you say to them, like, yeah, I could see your point. I definitely want to improve that for next time. Do you think that's you like taking yourself down a notch? Like you're not believing in what you made anymore, or?
Well, not really. It depends on, sometimes you're saying that because you're playing politics and you just want to
Right,
person
yeah.
to feel that their opinion is counted.
Mm-hmm.
And also too, sometimes someone will point out something where it's like, oh gosh, I could have made that thing, but you'll know within your heart. It's like, you know, I could have done that thing better. But also from the person who's telling you this information, why are they telling you this? Because there's information that they give you that, of course, it could be helpful. There's other information where it's not for you, it's for them.
True. It's about them.
Especially when it's out of context. He's like, can I tell you something about your, hold on a sec, just from that's not for me.
Thank you. I hate that.
You're not trying to make me better.
I hate that.
This
I'm
is
like,
for you.
Yeah.
Right? People do that shit all the time. It's like, can I just tell? And like, no, you know what? You can keep that to yourself.
Yeah.
Because you're not telling me this because you want to make me better as a filmmaker or better as a comedian or better whatever. You're doing this because something I did or whatever, it's unsettling for you. Right? And you feel that you have to get that off your chest, especially to someone, whatever my level of status is, to say to yourself, wow, I told an Academy Award winner how to do his job better.
Yeah. That, yes, that gives
That
them.
feels good. Like I told Denzel. And the Denzel dog, you know why he does that? Is because I told him.
And I've heard stories like that.
Oh yeah, you hear this stuff, right? I told him this. I remember one time, a girl, a fan of mine, gave me a critique on something. No, she gave me an idea for something I already thought of.
Right.
Right, I already thought of this. I was already in the works, and the person brought it up, not in a bad way or anything. She just brought up saying, "Hey, you know what you should do one day?" And she told it to me, and I didn't have the heart to say that I'm working on it right now. I couldn't even bother. So all I said was, "Thank you for that. I appreciate it." Right. And after when it came out, a year later, her thing was, "You see that idea that Mo came up with? That was my idea. I came up with that." I'm like, "Not really. I actually came up with it, but I beat you to the punch. But when you told me that, I just didn't have the heart to say to her, 'Oh, by the way, no, I already thought of that.'" I just thank you for that. I appreciate it. And just kept it moving.
Did you leave it alone when she started?
Oh yeah, I just left it alone because I'm like, listen, if that's her claim to fame and it makes her feel good, let her feel good. Whatever. It wasn't anything bad. It was just she just wanted everyone to know that it came from her. Hey, put it on your resume if you like. Whatever.
You know what? I'm really glad that we got to this point in the conversation. I feel like I needed to hear every single thing that was said today, especially in relation to how to deal with egos, like not my own, but others.
What we should do one day, it doesn't even have to be here, it could be in person, but a group of young entertainers, we can have like even if it's like a workshop, whatever, just having these conversations about the things that entertainers actually go through that you can't talk about. Because if you talk about it with regular people, they'll be like, look at you, you egotistical bastard. Living the dream. You're out there, people get to see your work, whatever.
What are you complaining about?
Yeah, there should be better things or worse things that you can complain about. It's like these are things that entertainers need to get off their chest. They need to talk about these things. Because once you get into the entertainment business, especially when you get into the level of TV and movies and stuff like that, you start to become self-conscious of everything. I remember one guy, when I was in my younger days doing TV, this younger guy always used to tell me if I gained a little bit of weight. It started to bother me. He didn't. It bothered me that I had to keep watching my weight.
Yeah. I was thinking earlier, one of the examples you gave, I was thinking about a model who would, if you believe what society says a model has to be and has to look like traditionally, then you start to operate in a way like where you start depriving yourself of certain foods and stuff like that. It was when we were talking about like something about not eating. And I do think that happens, like where people, they think they have to operate in a certain way to be seen as a certain thing. And it won't make sense if people see you scarfing down a burger. Even if your body allows it, a model would not do it so that people won't question why. Oh, you can't do that. You're a model. Oh yeah. We were talking about that earlier. Like, what you can and can't do because you have a certain title.
Yeah. And just like, I'll be honest with you. Anytime I buy a veggie burger, I'm conscious. Because if you don't ask me, because people will say, "Yo, you eating a burger?" So no, I'm not eating a burger. I'm eating a veggie burger. Right? I've never strayed and had a meat burger. It's always if I'm having a burger, it's a veggie burger. And people always say, "Yo, I see you with that burger," but half the times people don't say anything. So I'm like, "Oh shit, they think it's a real burger."
Right? It's like I could let everybody know.
Hey, I'm walking with a veggie burger. Hey guys, got a vegan burger. Hey, Beyond Meat.
I love my Beyond Meat burger.
Yeah. Right. But it's that thing. I'm just like, oh gosh, shit. People think I'm contradicting myself. So it's like I have to make it known, or I got to eat the burger in secret. And it really is just a veggie burger. Right? Freaking this guy mentioned it once, I think.
Maybe. Maybe. I just wanted to point out, what's funny about models? I've been backstage with like skinny models and like plus size models, and it's totally different. Like the regular models, like they can't eat shit. When you go to a plus size model thing, they're just eating hot dogs, hamburgers. It looks like so much fun. It looks like so much fun.
It helps them in their business, right?
Yeah.
It's so funny because they're starving themselves, like puking. And the girls are just like, "Oh, you want a hot dog? I'll get you a burger, whatever." Just scarfing it down. Oh, it's hilarious.
I'll eat this burger for you.
Ah,
Goodness.
extremes. It's
That's funny.
hilarious.
Well, on that note, yeah, but as I was saying, one day with
Yes, I
young
would love to do that.
performers,
I think that's a great
something like
idea.
that would be cool, just to sit there and have a discussion about the negative side of the business and what to watch out for as young performers, and how can we keep our stuff in check so that we can move forward and still complete and do our art in the most authentic way possible while these things are happening, because it happens to everyone. Anyone who's in the business, they get some form of that. And the further you go up, the more you get, hoping that you're getting more money to compensate for that. But you're being vulnerable. You're putting yourself out there, and when you put yourself out there, you're a target. You're open for attack.
Honestly,
And anyone can make a comment. And because before, back in the day, there's things that people didn't realize growing up, because no one's ever brought it up. And as soon as they became somewhat famous, this thing keeps coming up now.
yeah. Like I remember my lisp. I knew I had one, but it
I
was
never knew you had one.
Yeah, me too.
Exactly. But then somebody, like one time someone pointed it out, like when I finally started doing a little public speaking in class. And then after that, it was like, I just couldn't get out of my head that I have this lisp and I need to fix it and I need to talk different. And it's like in my head, and certain other people pointed it out, but I'm very self-conscious about it. And whenever when I do mention it first, people are like, what lisp?
Yeah.
But yeah, and it only happened because I started talking more. Then it was almost like, I'm just like, should I just never speak again? So nobody will ever be able to say that.
Yeah.
Or I could fix it, or realize that I don't have a lisp that's that noticeable. Yeah, that
And
part.
it was probably nothing until
It was probably
someone
nothing.
says, well, in the public speaking realm, that shouldn't be there.
Yeah, they're like, oh, you're not going to be able to do that. Oh, when you record songs, it's going to come out. And yeah, all these kind of things.
Oh, that's like that girl from 3LW. That
Oh,
became
yeah.
an issue.
Mhm.
Yeah.
She had a list. She did.
You know what, though? I didn't even notice it back then.
I thought it was cute, though.
No, for real. I didn't even notice it. It's only when they mentioned that, listen to the song again. Someone in the sun on the outside, I was like, oh shit.
It's true.
Yeah. Life, eh?
We should do that workshop, because I think that I only recognize, like, I'm only able to deal with these things now and laugh at them and keep carrying on with my performing, because I've talked to people like you, or that share these things and say like, yeah, me too. That has happened to me. I've thought that before.
Wow.
I still think that now. Like,
Oh yeah. I still carry some of these things, even though I haven't entertained in almost 20 years. I still carry some of these things. I'm just like, oh man, that comment bothered me. Yeah, it comes with the game.
Man,
Right? So I always tell guys, especially if it's Nathan or anyone within our group, the stand-up comedy group, is like, let's deal with our personal shit now. Right? Because it's going to come back and it's going to confront you in the future. I guarantee it. It's going to bite you in the ass. Like, I'm a person who never likes going out. Like, ask Nathan, I'm not an outside person. I'm not that social. And what's the point I'm making on not being social? By being this way, having that, back in the day, I had to go out and do a lot of like charity gigs and red carpet stuff and all that, always made me uncomfortable. And when you're uncomfortable with these things, because I'm not used to doing those things, and then you have to do it because it's part of the public publicity you have to do. And every time you go out, you feel like, gosh, like you're carrying this burden with you everywhere you go, because my heart is pounding out of my chest.
Yeah.
And it's like, I feel like people can see it. Right.
True.
And every time or whatever, I have to put up a front and act like I'm the social person when I'm really not. And I got to fight it for the sake of the group or the team or the production or whatever the case is. And it's like, it starts to eat away at you. And so the moment that I do have time to be alone, I take advantage of it. And the thing you hear back is, I never see you anywhere. I thought you said you saw me all the time. What happened?
Honestly, then that's when I realized you can't go too far into what other people say.
You can't.
That's the perfect example why.
And this is why finding your authentic self makes sense, because you have to find that center of gravity within yourself. Because if you do everything for other people, it's going to eat you alive, because no one has the same taste, and no one shares the same opinion. You know what I mean? So all that stuff will just rip away at you. So you have to find yourself in a place where, what do I like? What makes me feel good? What makes me, to some degree? Because it's like, if you don't, people are going to be pulling at you, and you're going to be pulled at every direction.
Yes, finding the center of gravity.
Yeah,
like
find your center of gravity and you work from that. So even though you may have to compromise in certain levels, because there's no way you can do that without compromising. But if I have my center of gravity, I have my boundaries. I know within my mind of what I'm willing to do and what I'm not willing to do, regardless of the situation.
Right.
Right.
Beautiful.
And then people will start to know you for that. Right. And after a while, as time goes on, as you mature, people will gravitate to your center of gravity, as opposed to you bouncing around and trying to do everything what everyone does. It just, all you are is a dancing monkey.
Honestly,
always laughs when you hear the word monkey. I don't know what it is about me.
It's a funny term. I love that. What do you think about? I think about dancing monkey.
Dancing monkey. Tap tap tap.
Monkey,
tap,
monkey,
tap.
monkey.
Yeah. But on that note, I keep saying this. This time we're really
yes.
Well, that's it for now.
Peace and blessings.
Was that?
Oh, I said peace and blessings.
Peace and blessings. I thought it was an open opportunity for another 15 minutes, but I guess